Evan Hill, writer and researcher who joins us from New York City. Thank you for speaking with us on France 24.
Thank you for having me.
First off, what is the plausibility of rogue killers taking out Jamal Khashoggi?
Look, I think any of us who've been following this case, particularly those of us who've done human rights research in the region, whether in Egypt or other authoritarian regimes, know that this is highly unlikely, that these governments have a very top-down decision-making structure. None of us are prepared to say who ordered it, why, or when, but I find it highly unlikely that such a major abduction operation or killing operation could have been conducted without high-level approval.
The U.S. Secretary of State now in Saudi Arabia getting their version of the story. I don't know what the exchanges are there. And then traveling on to Turkey. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that they probably dispatched the Secretary of State to get a read of how the king and how the crown prince were reacting to the story, if they had a plan for dealing with the fallout, and if the worst hypotheses are true, to take a message from Riyadh to Ankara and to see if there can be a solution behind the scenes to this problem, which of course is what we're all very concerned about and why there have been calls for an independent and impartial and an international investigation, because the current idea of the Turks and the Saudis working together is absurd on its face, that you could have Saudi investigators investigating their own crime.
Yeah, and there's two different pieces of information coming out of Turkey today on that point, Evan. First of all, there's the strong words by Recep Tayyip Erdogan talking about paint being used to cover up toxic chemicals inside of the consulate. Your thoughts on that, and your thoughts on the fact that, well, the Turkish lira, the currency, which has been battered of late, has firmed up, with many wondering if there is some kind of a deal in the works.
One of the problems here, I think, is that the Turkish government under Erdogan is also extremely problematic. And this is an authoritarian environment where there is very little ability for the public to pressure for answers, very little transparency. Everything we know about this case has been leaked from Turkish authorities and sometimes relayed through U.S. intelligence to U.S. press. So it's really a game of telephone. What the Turks should do, if they want this to be a credible investigation, is to either release the evidence or to engage with, again, an international impartial investigation, because as long as this information drips out in leaks, then suspicions will only grow that this is all an effort to win some kind of political advantage.
So what could the deal be?
I think that's the billion-dollar question. I actually don't think that many, even informed speculators, have a good idea of what could be going on here. There is the possibility of increased Saudi investment in Turkey, some kind of loan deal, who knows, cooperation on Syria. It's really speculation at this point.
Last Friday, we saw the release of that U.S. pastor who'd been held on what he calls trumped-up terror charges, Andrew Brunson. Some wondering what could be the deal, not just between Turkey and Saudi Arabia, but between Turkey and the United States.
Yeah, certainly the timing of that was very interesting and obviously fueled a lot of speculation as to whether that was meant to get the United States off of Erdogan's back or something like that. Again, I think that the problem here is that we have two authoritarian governments of different stripes, obviously, but two governments with no transparency, with no public pressure, involved in this disappearance and most likely murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And it really does a disservice to him and to his family and to people who want to see accountability for this crime, for the rest of the world to allow these two governments to sort of proceed with a behind-the-scenes deal.
Evan, you heard our correspondent Philip Crowther describe how Donald Trump on Twitter trying to change the conversation by talking about domestic matters, and yet this story is staying in the public eye. Your thoughts on the amount of coverage that the disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi has gotten in the United States?
Yeah, I think this is an incredibly important issue that you just raised. This story of Jamal Khashoggi's disappearance has really broken through in American media in a way that I have not seen before. I mean, you've had terrible things in the Middle East since the Arab Spring, the massacre in Egypt in 2013 being one of them. None of these broke through into the mainstream American consciousness the way that Jamal Khashoggi's disappearance has. I think it's a very personal, human story that highlights the other abuses that the Saudi regime has been committing, whether in Yemen or domestically at home to its own activists. And so the key difference in this affair is that the president and his administration really can't get out from under it because of the public pressure. And that has forced Congress, particularly senators who have a lot to say on foreign policy, to take action. And I think that's the main difference here. I think the Trump administration is very closely tied to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is very closely tied to the Crown Prince. It's in their interest to see this go away quietly. But I think, I mean, I don't think I'm being optimistic here when I see the action in the U.S. Congress that has already taken place. And I don't think this is going to be able to go away anytime soon.
Evan Hill, writer and researcher, many thanks for joining us from New York City.